to hear from them all. I also keep looking at this and thinking, I want a wall in my house that looks just like this. It's so beautiful. Jelani, please come back up. So our first panel will feature 2 work-in-progress winners whose work focuses on climate, among other topics. They both also happen to be Columbia Journalism School graduates, Lorraine Busuano and Susie Cagle. Lorraine is a 2024 Lukas Work-in-Progress winner. She is a Chicago-based journalist whose reporting covers science, human rights, history, and health. Her book, Body Weather, Notes on Illness in the Anthropocene, is about living with chronic illness in a world undergoing rapid climate change. By focusing on her personal experience, the book illuminates the subtle connections between our bodies and the health of the planet. In their citation, the judges said, in poetic and haunting prose, she unearths intersections between her unique experience living with illness while also illuminating universal questions lodged within all of us. How do we learn to live with discomfort? How do we seek refuge from our own bodies and from weather that wraps itself around the world? Lorraine, would you please join us? Congratulations.
Wait, I think this flower situation.
Susie Cagle is a 2025 Lukas Work-in-Progress winner. She is a journalist and illustrator based in California who has worked as a reporter for The Guardian, for ProPublica, and for Grist. Her book, The End of the West, tells the story of California at the vanguard of colonialism, capitalism, and now climate change, through the stories of people and in places intent on profound adaptation. Susie spent years reporting from the farthest reaches of the state. The End of the West is the culmination of that effort, a rich mosaic of archival research and field reporting. The judges said, The End of the West is a rigorously reported, gracefully written chronicle of the making and unmaking of manifest destiny, a story that at its core is a fundamental reckoning of the future of our country and world. In vivid and immersive prose, Susie Cagle carefully unspools her narrative through the intimate lens of a place grappling with its own survival and adaptation. Susie, can you join us? Sorry, better rush off. Erica Hayasaki, can you please join us?
Thanks for being here. Congratulations to both of you. It was an honor to...
I'm going to just say a word about you.
Okay.
Lorraine and Susie are in conversation with Erica, who chaired the Work-in-Progress jury this year and was a judge last year, so thank you for that. A labor of love, I'm sure, but a labor nonetheless. Erica is a widely published journalist and author based in Southern California, a former correspondent for the Los Angeles Times. She is an associate professor in the literary journalism program at the University of California at Irvine. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, it was an honor to read both of your proposals and your work so far. Both of your books reckon with the forces of climate change and resilience. And I wanted to just start by asking each of you about how you came into these projects, if you could tell us a little bit about your journey into writing these books.
Okay. It was really the periodical reporting that I was doing over time, this kind of intermittent, this flood, this drought, this fire, for year after year. And each time I would do these kind of one-off stories, I realized that they were on their own creating this larger mosaic. I felt like I was hearing the same kinds of stories over and over again. The same themes were just popping up across totally different ecosystems and geographies and communities, poor people, rich people, flood, drought, too much water, not enough water. It took years to really strike me that, in fact, they all had this similar, deeper story. And I realized that the only way I could actually tell that story would be by tackling a book about it.
Thank you. All right.
So this was a very personal project for me. I lived in New York City during Hurricane Sandy when I was a grad student at Columbia, and 3 months later I had heart surgery. So this was not something that I had thought I was going to be writing about because it is such a personal topic. But the longer that I dealt with many various different kinds of chronic illness, the more that I saw connections between the types of extreme weather events that are happening around the world in my various places that I have lived. I don't think the idea of a climate haven is an accurate idea anymore. There are disasters everywhere, no matter where you go. And my question through life experience and reporting on science and climate and history became, how do we live with this? What can we do to survive it, make it better? How can we protect the people who are the most vulnerable, who are being impacted the most by these events?
One of, in your book, for example, both of your books are, so unique in approach as well. You braid the personal with the reporting, and I wonder if you could talk about that process of writing yourself into a story, but also simultaneously reporting this and telling a story on the ground.
That wasn't the plan originally. When I started thinking about this idea, I was interested in why the rates of autoimmune disease are rising globally at such a rapid pace. It's not something that researchers understand, and it happens more frequently among women. And then when I started reading about the ways that climate and other disasters, like the ever-increasing amount of microplastics in water and PFAS chemicals in water, are also impacting health, it became sort of impossible to pull the two apart. And what really kind of made it all come together for me was I started thinking about how we break down weather systems and how we break down body systems, because the medical system is incredibly specialized. I probably see almost a dozen different doctors for different things. So thinking about different parts of the body, like in my book, thyroid and temperature, heart and storm, and having those connecting points made it much easier to weave my personal story in with reporting on those weather elements and health issues.
And Susie, your book also is ambitious in scope, but also personal in the reporting and intimate. And at the same time, you have reported illustrations in your book. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the process of weaving this together as a narrative, and even your own artwork that's involved in it as well.
Yeah, I have drawn alongside writing my reporting for most of my career as a journalist, and I feel like it just allows for a completely different approach to the storytelling. you can, there's all this theory around how we empathize with images of people and, more detailed or more simplified images of people. And so by actually depicting the people that are in the story, I can kind of draw out that empathy. I can also show things show images over time. It can lead the narrative in ways that otherwise with text, I just feel like I can't do it in the same way. It can be a nice trick to be able to have a map or a diagram to just tell you all of that science without me having to spend like 1,000 words that certain people are not going to read all of. I can do that in images in just a much more elegant way. And this is the kind of book where I do have to, I can keep you in there with the characters and the stories, but there are times where I do have to tell you just how the water works and how the power gets over there and why the mountain fell down in this way. And sometimes pictures can do that so much more elegantly than just words ever could.
At the same time, there's so much ground level reporting in each of your books, and I'm wondering if you could talk about the challenges of reporting and writing this book. Like, is there a challenge that you feel like you overcame, or that you they had one of the hardest parts, I guess, about writing this book and getting to the point where you are now?
I think, obviously, the research was challenging. I did not write this book the way I have written in the past, where typically I have at least some kind of outline going into it. I did not. In this project, I sort of followed my nose, what struck my interest, what kind of questions I had about different things. And that was a bit of a scary process at times, because I didn't know what I was going to come to at the end of it. The other biggest challenge was obviously my health, my body. I had multiple research trips planned that I had to cancel. And in a way, I sort of was able to incorporate that into the book, talking about how having chronic illnesses does impact how you live your life, but conversely, the way that we live collectively at this point in time is pretty resource heavy. And how do we lighten the burden of the resources that we're consuming to go from place to place? And when is a trip necessary versus when can I read a bunch of papers and talk to someone on Zoom? So that was a big challenge, but I think it was useful to think about adaptations in the end.
Yeah, I mean, my biggest challenge was my appetite for the reporting. I think the reporting itself ended up taking me 2 to 3 times as long as, initially I thought that it would. And I'm so glad that I took all of that time and did so many more trips and spoke to so many more people than I think I just guessed that I would need to in the beginning. And I think that was really the challenge for me, is just it was so much more time intensive, and the benefit of time now, looking back on it, I can say that was all worth it. I think if I had known that in the beginning, it would have been so much more intimidating. The project changed quite a lot. I did have an outline going into it, and it's pretty different now, and that is great. Something that has come up sometimes when I talk to people about what I'm working on is I sold the book at the end of 2022, and then in 2023 there were massive flooding events in California, and very much a big part of the book. And but that was not a challenge, and in terms of the narrative, like that, it fit right in. So the fact that time has continued moving and there have been new events, like that hasn't been a challenge at all, which is maybe a little bit unexpected. But they just all fit into the framework that I had already created.
And of course, the LA fires recently happening. Finally, just in closing, I would love to ask you about what you hope, now that you're almost at the finish line, or you're at the finish line, what are you hoping when this comes out in the world, that the sort of takeaway that you hope people will come away reading your work with?
I have many hopes, but two big ones is that I hope it makes people more aware of how tightly entwined climate change and ecosystem collapse is with human health. You cannot have one without the other. And our research efforts need to be put in that direction. Our regulations need to be aware of those facts when they so often have not been in the past. And secondly, I think we're in a very challenging moment where people with illnesses and disability are often treated as disposable for one reason or another. And with the administration that we have right now, that is even more the case. So I would not have written this book with myself in it if I did not feel that sharing my story would be beneficial for other people. I want other people to have a recognition that the medical system we have is not set up to care for people, and that we can do better, we need to do better, and there are going to be many, many more sick and disabled people as long as we continue treating the planet the way that we have been, and we're going to need to care for those people, not just try to get rid of them.
Very powerful.
I hope that people understand the title of the book. It has made me really nervous, The End of the West. It is tongue-in-cheek. It is the end of a concept of the West that is outmoded, and it is not, the end of California. I totally agree with Lorraine that there are no climate havens, and I think that we need to make investments in places that we have done terrible things. We need to reckon with the terrible things that we have done, and that is part of adaptation. And so that is what I'm hoping that is the takeaway from the book. I have scared one interviewee off with the title of it, and I had to pull her back and explain to her that that's not what I meant, and she was on board.
Thank you both so much, and congratulations again.
Thank you, Lorraine and Susie. And I just wanted to say, for those who are interested in Erica's work, there is a fabulous new podcast interview that Mark Armstrong does with her. The Storyboard podcast that I just listened to, it's terrific. If you want to know how somebody who does amazing work on trauma does it, you should listen to this. Our next conversation will feature 3 winners, 2 work-in-progress winners from last year in this, Alice Driver and Dan Shin Wang, and 1 Lukas Prize winner from last year, Dashka Slater. Let's hear about them. Alice Driver is a James Beard Award-winning writer from the Ozark Mountains in Arkansas. She is the author of More or Less Dead and the forthcoming Artists All Around, a memoir about her family's relationship with author and illustrator Maurice Sendak. By shining a light on the lives of the immigrant laborers from marginalized communities who prepare our food, her Lukas winner, The Life and Death of the American Worker, unmasks Tyson Foods, the largest meat processing company in the U.S. Tyson Foods relies overwhelmingly on immigrants and refugees to do the difficult and dangerous daily labor of processing chickens. The judges said, The Life and Death of the American Worker is a rigorously researched work of narrative nonfiction that exemplifies the spirit of holding powerful institutions accountable while humanizing the individuals who've been systematically dehumanized by immigration law and unregulated labor practices. Please welcome Alice to the podium. Dan. Dan Shin Wang is an independent writer and journalist with a focus on politics and global affairs, whose work has appeared in Foreign Affairs, Foreign Policy, and New York Magazine, among others. He previously worked as a financial reporter at the Wall Street Journal. In Rudder, the story of an American underclass, a thoroughly reportive narrative, Dan returns to his Appalachian hometown of Athens, Ohio, a community beset by segregation, to offer an exploration of class in America. He gives voice to people on all sides, across generations, political affinities, and socioeconomic strata, of a heated historic school integration debate. The judges said, relying upon years of reporting and immersion, he asks readers to consider, how do American taboos about class drive our motivations and shade our interactions? And how do they steer, as both symptom and cause, our very conception of education? Athens becomes a powerful microcosm for considering profound fractures within the rest of the country. Can you join us, Dan? Dashka Slater has written for such publications as the New York Times, Magazine, Newsweek, Salon, the author of books for children and adults. She teaches in Hamline University's MFA in Writing for Children and Young Adults program. She lives in Oakland, California. Accountable recounts the story of a racist social media account that changes everything for a group of teens. When a high school student started a private Instagram account that used racist and sexist memes to make his friends laugh, he thought it was just edgy humor. In the end, everyone was left asking, how do we measure accountability for online speech that harms, and what does accountability even mean? The judges said, with honesty and authenticity, Slater gets into the minds and under the skin of a group of teenage subjects, as well as the flailing adults ripped to shreds by the toxic power of online speech. Accountable confronts sticky questions of race, class, and gender head-on and with care, resulting in an explosive page-turning masterwork. Dashka, will you join us? Alice, Dan, and Dashka will be in conversation with Adrienne Nicole LeBlanc, who judged the Work-In-Progress Awards this year. Adrienne is a journalist whose work focuses on the marginalized members of society. She is best known for her 2003 nonfiction book, Random Family: Love, Drugs, Trouble, and Coming of Age in the Bronx. She spent over 10 years reporting and writing that book. She was also a recipient of the MacArthur Fellowship in 2006. Thank you for joining us.
Good evening. Is this on? Yes? Okay. So one of the great pleasures of being able to discuss these books in this audience, and let's see if I can, how to say this. I read books, whenever I hear books, my book described to me, it's a kind of alienating experience because the marginalized members of society that I wrote about are the people I come from. And books, in one way or another, and books to me were guides about about the world beyond the world I lived in. Some of the books were books about the world I did live in. And one thing I didn't know until I became a writer is that books were also conversations with other writers, right? Books are talking to each other. And the joy in reading these books for the Lukas Award had to do with, for me, was getting to know Anthony Lukas, his work more deeply, but recognizing the way that his legacy is being refined and extended and expanded upon in these very books that you've worked on that are extraordinary. In an article about him, Linnell Hancock said that he was describing his intellectual journey, and Lukas said, "The book didn't take me from left to right or from right to left, but from the party of simplicity to the party of complexity." And I'm wondering if each of you would like to just comment in terms, I noticed in your books there's very complex structures. Lots of people are characterized in the books in great detail and intimacy. And I wondered if you could talk about that move from simplicity to complexity, or if you began in complexity and went into some other realm. Would you like to begin, Alice?
Yeah, I would love to begin. I'm from the Ozark Mountains of Arkansas, and I always wanted to escape. I thought, here's not the place to be. And I spent a long time reporting as a freelance journalist in Mexico, and I ended up back home during the pandemic. And so it began as one article. I had $2,000 in funding from the Economic Hardship Reporting Project. And I had been thinking for a long time of writing about meatpacking workers, because Arkansas is the home of the largest meatpacking company in the United States, Tyson Foods, which is the second largest globally. And yet I feel like there's almost no, especially within Arkansas, there's no scrutiny of Tyson. And so it began as one article following a group of workers in Arkansas. And we have the largest population of refugees from the Marshall Islands, climate refugees, and they work in meatpacking. We also have refugees from Myanmar, the Korean minority, and from Central America. And so I just thought we know so little about the workers who are producing our food. And I am from this state, and we know so little. And I ended up following the lives of a group of workers for 4 years.
I just want to quickly say it truly is an honor for me to be here, to get to be a part of this discussion. I'm here for the Work-In-Progress Award, and my work is very much in progress. These guys have been putting out work for so long that I've really respected, really admired, and so if it was up to me, I wish I could be sitting in the audience with everyone else listening to you guys talk for way longer. The book that I am working on is about a school district in Southeast Ohio that's majority white, but there's still a big socioeconomic divide. It doesn't play out along racial lines. It plays out along class and cultural lines. For me, one of the big lessons has been, not too long ago, when I thought about education, I just thought it was something that happened within schools. If it was happening within schools, then you would call it education. If it happened outside of the schools, then I didn't think much about it. And there's the critic and the writer Bell Hooks. She talks about the banking system of education. She gets that idea from a Brazilian Marxist named Paulo Freire. The idea is that with the banking system, knowledge is treated as a kind of fixed static currency that you deposit into the heads of little children as if they were storage vaults. And thankfully, we have other visions of education. There's a philosopher that I've been reading a lot about named John Dewey, and he is the father of democratic education. He understands education as something that's fluid, something that's happening all around us. So we can't help but be in a state of participating in education if we're alive and if we're conscious. And these days, I really see education as the most upstream thing that we could possibly be having any kind of conversation about. A lot of education happens almost on this meta level of what's happening relationally within a classroom. And so it's completely just infiltrated everything that, just my entire worldview now. So it's been a transformative journey.
Thank you.
I resonate so much with that quote because my whole career, I feel like, has been about complexity, and what makes any story interesting is if it's complicated. So obviously, a racist social media account, it feels like there's not a lot of complexity. They're like, that's wrong. So we're not debating that. But as I got into reporting this story, I just kept on finding these layers and layers and layers of complexity of each person's experience of this injury, and how do you respond? Dan mentioned the great Bell Hooks, and there's a quote of Bell Hooks that opens the book in which she, in conversation with Maya Angelou, asked this question, which is, how do we hold people accountable for wrongdoing while at the same time staying in touch with their humanity enough to believe in their capacity to be transformed? And that was very much an operating question for me as I was writing about, 16-year-olds who, hopefully had a long road ahead of them of growth and change. And so when I think about all of the big policy questions that we have as a society, we are usually trying to balance things that are in opposition, but they are values that we have on both sides. So we want accountability, but we also want growth and transformation for young people. And so it's not an either or, it's how do we do all of this? And so as these young people were trying to metabolize this experience, either the Black girls who were targeted by the account or the mostly white and Asian boys who created or followed the account, all of them had like a different way of thinking about what had happened and what their own story was. And so there were so many different ways to traverse the same path. The Black girls among them had very different responses. Some of them wanted to find a way to reconcile or forgive, and some of them needed their anger and their fury to get through the experience, and then that was a conflict. Like, how do we, are we going to have solidarity with one another if we have different ideas about how we're going to get through this? And on the other side, the account followers were both defensive of this community is seeing us as the authors of racism, and we're 16 years old, and we didn't understand the full complexity of what we did, and we did this thing, and so how do we take on the true sense of our own accountability while not being shattered by that revelation that we have done something so harmful? So all of these layers, to me, that's the interesting part, is to try and parse through how one incident is going to refract in so many different perspectives. And somehow, if you can get all of the perspectives, then that three-dimensional view is something like the truth.
This sort of leads to another question about, I feel all of your finished books and your soon-to-be finished books, they're deeply moral projects. And I think journalism journalism can be an act of moral imagination as well as deeply important documentation. But I do believe when the writer and the story are so deeply engaged in the experience of the reporting and the writing and then rendering it for an audience that they're trying to reach, that your moral core, it can be engaged. And I wonder if this resonates with you as a true part of your experience. And either way, if you would just share with us an experience you had during the writing or reporting that challenged you in a way that led you to discover something new about yourself, or give you more confidence in something that you believed about yourself that you were happy to discover actually was true when tested.
Well, I talk about, in my book, I talk about moral beauty in terms of moral beauty is love in action, which is, I went to school at Berea College. I don't know if you all are familiar with it, but it's a work school in Eastern Kentucky. And actually, when I was there, Bell Hooks was teaching, so I had this really incredible social justice environment, and moral beauty was a concept that came out of my time at Berea, and I really wanted to think of workers, of meatpacking workers, in that light. And in my work on the book, I never thought it was going to be a book. Every day I was thinking I was going to get sued by Tyson Foods, which made $53 billion last year. So it took me a long time to figure out how to gather the support to write this book, and part of that was truly winning this award that gave me the courage to finish it. And in terms of workers, I mean, they obviously are going through so many things. Most of the workers in my book, by the time I finished it, they're either dead, many of them died of COVID, or they're disabled from accidents or things related to COVID. So I really wanted to tell about the dangers of the meatpacking industry and the lack of safety through the lives, the daily intimate lives of the workers. And part of doing any kind of long-term storytelling is really giving everyone, myself and the workers, space. You know, sometimes workers would disappear for months at a time, and, you know, they're going through their own things. And I remember I was supposed to visit a worker, and I showed up at her house, and she was hiding. She just cracked open the door, and she said, "Oh, I've been so depressed." And it's just like there's, you know, at every point you're both, you know, you're in this relationship where they want to share a story and you want to tell it, and you're just like, how can we, you know, how can I give you the space to do this? And that was always, you know, my goal, and that I was able to do that, and I'm continuing to do work on a short film with the workers. So to me, that really, I think that's definitely tested my all of my strength, and yeah, I feel like I've learned a lot just from the workers who I interviewed.
Thank you.
I'm going to keep the bell hooks love going.
Yes.
Bell hooks would say that there was a difference between education for domination, which is what she saw happening in most schools most of the time, and education for liberation. And one thing that I just have been learning over and over again, I mentioned earlier that something that had not factored into what I thought about schooling at all was the relational component. A big part of the work that I've been doing has been talking to school teachers, and something that just keeps coming across is, you know, at this point I've been sort of introduced myself at dinner parties or friends of friends or whatever, and I've been saying I'm writing a book about schools, and to a T, there is no one, you know, they could be retired, they could be talking about their memory, their experience of school from 50, 60 years ago. No one is talking about, oh boy, like I really did well on that exam, or I flubbed that exam. They're talking about that one time that the teacher saw something in them, or they're talking about that one time that the teacher turned their back on them and dismissed them, and just a burden that they've always carried because of stray incidents like that. And so, you know, I just have so much respect for school teachers. My first roommate out of college was a public school teacher up in the Bronx, and I went to school studying finance. And some of my classmates that I graduated with, to know that they were, I mean, my book's about class too, so this stuff is top of mind. They're making 3 times the salary that my roommate was making, you know, just getting floored every day by teaching non-English learners. Yeah, so yeah, I guess there is a moral dimension, and I'm hoping to be able to amplify the voices of teachers more as one of the things in this book.
Journalism is always this incredibly complex moral dance because, you know, I always feel this incredible weight of responsibility that I'm trying to tell somebody's stories, and often I seem to be telling the story of like the worst time in their lives. And what I'm trying to do is something I called in my own head enhanced subjectivity rather than objectivity, that I'm like trying to show how each person would tell their story if they, you know, were the author of the book. You know, what's their way of understanding these events. And what I struggle with often is that I'm writing about very young people who are partially formed and who are in danger of being defined forever by an experience that happened to them as teenagers, which I think is wrong. I think that we all should have the opportunity to grow and change and outlive, some of the worst things we've ever done. At the same time, part of that process is to fully engage with whatever that thing was. And, if we hope to outlive it, we have to go through it. And so, but I have a lot of fear when I'm working of, is this young person going to be okay? Are they going to survive this experience? Am I going to help them survive it? Or, is bringing it into the public eye more going to be, a danger to them? And so one of the things that I keep coming back to is the revelation that, as Alice said, people want to tell their story. And so when I started reporting this book, the girls who had been targeted were, reeling from this experience, and the boys who had created or followed the account were pariahs in their community. Most of them felt unable to leave their homes, and some of them were in physical danger. And so they were all in this state of distress, and they felt so, to a person, everybody felt misunderstood. And that what they wanted was to have a chance to tell their story in all its complexity, and and through the process of telling it, to then kind of have a chance to figure out what the story actually was for them. And to me, that's that was the great moral gift, was to realize that it was in fact helpful for everybody to have, and for their community, to have a chance to process this story and to think about what it really meant and what everybody's role was. The gift, I think, of journalism is also, the most terrifying thing about it is that we're right about real people and we want to take good care of them. And we are making this sort of trust relationship contract with the future, that we believe that in the future they will be happy that they told this story.
I would like to say, as a reader of all these projects, I felt the moral power in the care of the details at the level of the sentence work and all the, as a practitioner and all that hard work, but in the quality of attention that allowed me to see so much so anew. And I just feel so much gratitude to you all, and congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all. The bell hook's love was beautiful. So now we're going to honor the last year and this year's Lukas Prize and Lynton History Prize finalists. The first honoree is not able to be with us tonight, and that's Carrie Howley, the 2024 Lukas Prize finalist for Bottoms Up and the Devil Laughs, A Journey Through the Deep State. A Lannan Foundation Fellow, she holds an MFA from the University of Iowa, where she was a professor at the celebrated nonfiction writing program until joining New York Magazine. The judges said Carrie's Bottoms Up and the Devil Laughs is a portrait of a world in which privacy is fading, but secrets abound. A handful of her characters, including reality winner, divulge classified information in the name of greater public awareness. The results are invariably disastrous. A beautifully written, entirely original book, Bottoms Up describes a time and a world that has too much information to know itself. Our next finalists are co-authors Pamela Prickett and Stephen Timmermans, the 2025 Lukas Prize finalists for The Unclaimed, Abandonment and Hope in the City of Angels. Pamela is an associate professor of sociology at Pomona and a writer and former broadcaster. Stephen is a professor of sociology at UCLA. He is the author of an award-winning scholarly book on forensic death investigations. The judge's citation reads, "The unclaimed is an outstanding feat of journalism that sheds light on a drama kept hidden from the American public. With boundless empathy and a powerful eye for detail, Pamela and Stefan have created a series of intimate and compelling stories about the lives of ordinary people who die alone." Please join us, Pamela and Stefan.
Yeah, we tried it.
Gary J. Bass is the 2025 Mark Lynton History Prize finalist for Judgment at Tokyo, World War II on Trial and the Making of Modern Asia. Gary is the William Boswell Professor of World Politics of Peace and War at Princeton University and the author of The Blood Telegram, which was a Pulitzer finalist in general nonfiction. The jury said, "Gary's Judgment at Tokyo is a masterpiece of historic writing. Nuanced, riveting, and meticulously researched, Judgment at Tokyo takes readers into the inner workings of the Allies as they prosecuted 28 Japanese leaders after World War II for war crimes and atrocities. Defense lawyers for the Japanese argued that Japan had fought the war to liberate Asia from Western colonialism. Far from resulting in moral clarity, the trial ended in fractious division and dissension. Please welcome Gary. This year, the Mark Lynton History Prize jury chose 2 finalists. Both of them were honored by the Pulitzers yesterday. The first is Etta Fields Black for Combi, Harriet Tubman, the Combahee River Raid, and Black Freedom during the Civil War. Etta is the author of Deep Roots, Rice Farmers in West Africa and the African Diaspora. She lives with her family in Pittsburgh, where she teaches history at Carnegie Mellon University. And she won the 2025 Pulitzer Prize for Combi, so congratulations. I'm not done with you. The judge's citation reads, "In her brilliant and thoroughly researched study, Etta shines a light on the aspect of Harriet Tubman's life that has not yet been explored in much depth. Tubman's involvement in the Civil War. Drawing insights from previously unexamined sources, she charts in vivid detail how Tubman effectively served the Union Army. With the sharp eye of an historian of West Africa and the diaspora, she masterfully situates Tubman's life and service within U.S. and transnational narratives." Please congratulate her. The second finalist for the Lynton Prize goes to Seth Rockman for Plantation Goods, A Material History of American Slavery, also a finalist for the Pulitzer. Seth is an associate professor of history at Brown University. He is the author of Scraping By, Wage Labor, Slavery, and Survival in Early Baltimore. Plantation Goods is a 2025 Pulitzer Prize finalist. The judge's citation reads, "At the heart of Yankee ingenuity lay a fundamental secret that none dared name slavery. Seth brilliantly shows New England's mills, factories, mercantile houses, and packet ships relied on the wealth produced by stolen labor. The astonishing detective work reveals how New England's men on the make sent agents to Alabama, Kentucky, and Missouri to design and distribute the reliable plantation axes, cheap leather shoes, and durable Negro cloth that would make American manufacturers famous around the world. Seth, please join us. Now, our third and final conversation of the evening's program. We'll hear from two Lynton Prize winners, Ned Blackhoff, and from 2024, and for 2025, Kathleen Duvall, and also Lukas Prize winner, Rebecca Nagel. Let's hear about their books. Rebecca is an award-winning reporter, writer, and citizen of the Cherokee Nation. She is the creator and host of Crooked Media's chart-topping podcast, The Land. Her work has been featured in The Atlantic, The Washington Post, The HuffPost, among other outlets. She lives in Oklahoma. By the Fire We Carry, the generations-long fight for justice on Native land recounts the struggle for tribal land and sovereignty in eastern Oklahoma. Rebecca braids together the story of the forced removal of Native Americans onto treaty lands in the nation's earliest days with a small-town murder in the 1990s that led to a Supreme Court ruling reaffirming Native land rights more than a century later. The judges said, Rebecca reminds us with startlingly original reporting and deft literary skill that this injustice is alive and well today, particularly in the realm of the law. Wading through endlessly thorny legal details and exposing the stunningly resilient prejudice toward her people, even or especially from some of our most lauded Supreme Court justices, her story ends in a rare triumph for her community. Please welcome her. Ned Blackhawk is a member of the Timonic tribe of Western Shoshone, and he'll correct me on all of my pronunciations, I hope, from Nevada. A professor of history and American studies at Yale University, where he is faculty coordinator for the Yale Group for the Study of Native America. The most enduring feature of U.S. history has been the presence of Native Americans, yet most American histories give scant attention to how Native Americans have shaped American history, even though Indigenous history has grown into one of the 21st century's most dynamic field of historic inquiry. The rediscovery of America tells the history of America from the first decades of Spanish colonial exploration to the rise of Native American self-determination in the late 20th century. It shows that Native history remains essential to understanding the evolution of modern America. The judges said, Ned Blackhawk's stunning achievement in the rediscovery of America flows from his opening question: how can a nation founded on the homelands of dispossessed Indigenous peoples be the world's most exemplary democracy? What follows is a revelatory, refreshing, and necessary reconceptualization of U.S. history. Ned, please join us. And Kathleen Duvall is professor of history at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, teaching early American and American Indian history. She was just here 2 weeks ago being honored with the Bancroft Prize, and she won the Pulitzer. So, welcome back. Native Nations, a millennium in North America, is an essential American history that places the power of Native nations at its center. A millennium ago, North American cities rivaled urban centers around the world in size. Then, following climate change and instability, numerous smaller nations emerged, moving away from rather than toward urbanization. From this urban past, egalitarian government structures, diplomacy, and complex economies spread across North America. The judges said this of her work. Kathleen counters the narrative of rapid and inevitable Native decline with persuasive examples drawn from all over North America that go well beyond a few episodes of Native history taught at school to demonstrate Indigenous agency, vitality, humanity, and resourcefulness. Please join us. And we're fortunate to have Andres Resendez with us tonight to moderate this last conversation. He was chair of the Lynton jury this year and a member of the jury last year. He is a professor of history and an author who grew up in Mexico City and currently teaches at the University of California, Davis. His specialties are early American exploration and colonialization of the Americas, the U.S.-Mexico border region, and the early history of the Pacific Ocean. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. Well, I mean, it has been an incredible joy, and I'm not going to gloat about our judging abilities, but I'll just leave it at that. We also have the dreaded last panel. We are everything that's standing between you and food and drink and celebration. So we'll get to the point, and these three really extraordinary works, these brilliant works that that were presented to us and that won, really ask one very fundamental question, which is not too long ago, just a few decades ago, Native peoples sprinkled here and there in the American continent served as foil to the real history of Europeans as they moved west or north from Mexico. And now we have a very different feel. Two of these works are really great new thinking about this particular problem, and Rebecca's work is really beautifully written, multi-generational, also taking a clear stance about this history. So I guess the obvious question is, what do we now know about Native history, and how does that change our understanding of U.S. history?
I'm happy to begin as last year's word of
we can go chronologically.
I've been thinking about this conversation for all the months since last spring, and so I think I can perhaps help us understand that we all, I think, I know Kathleen and Rebecca well, and I think I can speak on behalf of all of us when we say that we've all been miseducated about the history of the United States. And there's a fundamental absence that sits at the heart of the field of American historical inquiry, and that is the relationship between Native nations or Native peoples and non-Native peoples, what in Canada scholars refer to as Native newcomer relations. We as a national community, we as kind of academic and public intellectuals, our national consciousness has really never really grappled with the extent of the magnitude of this missing element of American historical inquiry. So Kathleen and I, are part of the academic world and kind of undertook these fairly massive undertakings to remedy this omission. And it's, very gratifying to see how well these works have been doing. But I actually would maybe, if I might intercede a bit and say it wasn't just decades ago. It feels like weeks and months and years ago, or even minutes ago, that the national community has really been unable to kind of grapple with these questions. And while in certain circles or certain institutional spaces, these things are more recognized, we still have a very long ways to go.
Thank you.
I might add, as a journalist, I think that the problem is beyond how history is talked about, and I think it's about how Native people are situated in the national conversation more broadly, which I think is that we're just erased and we're constantly left out. And so whether or not people are reporting on COVID-19 or climate change or college admissions, all of these things that are impacting Native people, over and over and over again, my profession erases us. And so when you look at news and media and pop culture, less than a fraction of a percent of all of those things are Native people going to be represented. And what results from that is that, the overwhelming majority of Americans could not name a single living Native person today, like over 80% of people surveyed in the United States. A really high percentage of Native people in the US, almost half, don't think that we still exist even. And I think that level of erasure serves a function, right? And so, I personally think that when we think about genocide and we think about the erasure and the kind of, or sometimes people use the word like elimination that comes with settler colonization, like the idea is to constantly get rid of us. And I feel like one of the last phases of that is erasing us from the American consciousness, right? And so that while we still, we're still here, we constantly have to say that as Native people, like, we exist, we're still here, but we're erased from people's minds and we're erased from what people think about. And it has real world impacts, right? And so, every time there's a big national study about public health disparities, Native people are left out. And then when you go check the data on Native Americans, we're one of the, if not the most impacted groups. And so I guess I would say that I think this leaving us out of history, for me as a journalist, I kind of situate it more in just the broader conversation of how, as Native people, we're just left out of everything. And I think as a society, we really need to start to grapple with the function of that erasure, because it's not just a book, it's not just a textbook, it's not just a school, it's structural, where it's K through 12 education, it's college education, but it's also television and movies and media and all of those things. So yeah, I would say not just a couple decades ago, but like today, right now, happening.
It was worse a couple decades ago. There's no doubt about it. So.
Yeah, definitely.
That's such great points. And I would only add that I hope, my book takes a much long, a millennium of history or so. And I hope one of the things it does is actually put the United States in perspective of that, the United States is not the only nation on this continent. The United States, Mexico, and Canada are not the only nations on this continent. There are hundreds and hundreds of Native nations still here today, and that were here many thousands of years ago in, changing forms, of course, through history. And to put that even in more perspective, perhaps this country's been around 250 years, and it may prove to be somewhat a blip in Native American history, right?
Absolutely.
I'm a historian. I'm not gonna predict.
Yeah, that's a 1,000-year-old perspective right there. So to wrap this up, my final question is: so what happens next? What steps do we take? Where do we go from here in terms of either knowledge production or in terms of, as you were saying, outreach? Or how do we change this dynamic?
That's such a great question. I think that these are such important original books, and you've done original important work on Indigenous history, and yet it also seems like we're totally not the first, and the people have been telling these stories for a long time. And I think you're right, Andres. This has become Indigenous history is a central part of American history these days for historians. And in some ways, I'm not actually sure what to do. It's just, I guess, just keep writing these and keep making sure that we point out every time that Native people aren't included, Native nations aren't included in everything from today's stories to big history books. I don't know, maybe my fellow panelists have better ideas than I do.
It's nice to see the kind of level of recognition that has happened in recent months and years for this field. Professor Resendez is a little modest. He's written monumentally important works in this field as well, including a book called The Other Slavery that I highly recommend to anyone. There's a kind of growing literature in this field, and a rising tide, in a certain sense, intellectually can lift many ships. And I think the work that needs to be done is to continue what will ultimately be a kind of endless conversation about the relative inability, or the function, as Rebecca called it, that this kind of missing understanding of America really means. What does it really mean to not understand the first human societies, the most enduring human societies, the oldest human societies? It's hard to even find a textbook that will mention, for example, some of the millennia subject matters that Kathleen has written about. The oldest continuously occupied spaces on the North American continent are Native nations. You'd have to read early chapters in these works to kind of figure out which ones those are. I'm happy to offer that lecture later. But this means a lot, obviously, to the kind of current composition of Native America itself. We are living through a kind of remarkably, seemingly accelerated kind of political moment where dramatic questions that seemingly were lost, or were seemingly parts of history, are now back in front of us. Questions like annexation, reterritorialization, certain forms of exclusionary constitutional citizenry. Those are all rooted in doctrines of American Indian law and U.S. expansion in some form. But if we don't teach American Indian law and policy, if we don't really understand it, we'll have an inability to kind of intervene and even understand these kind of subsequent challenges. So the kind of erasure of Native America provides for some academics and writers and a kind of endless space of engagement. The kind of textbook industry that Rebecca was referencing or gesturing towards is so deeply problematic in this regard that one could write extensive academic or intellectual inquiries into the absence of Native peoples throughout some of the most canonical or the longest published U.S. history textbook undertaking. So this process will provide a lot of, its process of omission will provide a lot of energy for those who are drawn to it, but hopefully others can kind of come to it and see also kind of critical elements of our kind of national community that are currently not perhaps readily evident.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ned.
I want to piggyback a little bit on what Ned said about how the things that we don't understand about what our country did to Native people are coming back up in this moment. I just want to give a couple examples that I talk about some in the book. And the first is lawlessness, right? And so I think you see this history in Native America where there's an entire body of law and entire Title 25, whether it's treaty rights or federal Indian law policy, where so often when the law clearly protects the rights of a tribe, but a group of settlers wants what belongs to the tribe, our government ignores the law and sort of looks the other way. A famous example I give in my book where there was a Supreme Court decision defending the homeland of Cherokee Nation. And the president at the time, who was Andrew Jackson, refused to enforce it. And so I think this this deteriorating of the law that we're seeing in this moment, and especially the executive acting outside or without the law, is something that it has happened before in this country, and we didn't deal with it, right? And then I think the other thing that is coming back up in this moment that I think we need to talk about is I think oftentimes we treat Native history sort of like this this distant chapter of the American story, sort of like this tragic, long ago chapter, but it's actually foundational. And I think that so much of what happened before is coming back again. And I think that and to bring that back to the question of like what will change our conversations about these topics, I think is when people realize that it's relevant to all of us. I think so often as a Native journalist, I'm treated like I'm talking about like a special interest issue, right? Or I'm talking about this like special topic. But these are issues that impact all of us. Like right now in the birthright citizenship case, they're relying on the fact that for a long time, Native people were born in this country and that we don't have a constitutional right to citizenship. We only have citizenship by statute. In the charter school case about religious charter schools, they're using the precedent of federal funding for boarding schools. And so all of these things come back around. And then the last thing I want to say, because we're sitting in the Columbia Journalism School, is what journalism can do, because journalism is doing horrible. It's just completely not doing any good to Native communities. And I think that the problem is like when I talk to editors or when I talk to people in newsrooms, they keep thinking about covering Indian country like they need to address it like a diversity problem. And what I always say is we need to address it like a journalism problem, because your reporting isn't factually accurate. It's not well informed. It's not timely. It's not meeting the standards of our profession. So it's not that you need to have more Native people in the newsrooms. It's that you need to treat our communities with the same standard you treat anyone else. I'll give an example. Reporters go out to tribal governments to talk to tribal officials all the time, not knowing squat about the tribe. Right? Asking, not even knowing what the basic government structure is. You wouldn't send a reporter to City Hall who doesn't know who the mayor is. So why are you doing that to a tribe, right? And so I think, and I don't know, I can't speak about it to academia, but as a journalist, I'm like, we know what the standards of professionalism is for our industry. And so we just need to apply that same standard of professionalism to Indigenous communities. And really a lot of times what that looks like is resources, right? Is investing the resources to do the reporting and to do the stories right. So that's my soapbox. Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Thank you, all three of you. And we are in minus 35 seconds, so we're over our time. But I just wanted to say that it has been an incredible joy to read all these books. And it is a great platform to provoke these kinds of discussions here. So I thank you, our sponsors, organizers, for making this possible. So thank you.
I'm pretty sure I'm just supposed to say congratulations to everyone, and there's a reception downstairs. Oh, okay, here it is. Congratulations to the 2020. I do this a lot, so it's like I have an instinct for it. Congratulations to the 2024 and 2025 J. Anthony Lukas Prize honorees. It is always both impressive and inspiring to see the level of substance and craft that these works embody. Now, please enjoy the reception on the first floor atrium. I knew that was in there. And before you go, would all of tonight's winners and finalists please join us on stage or at the front for a final class photo? Thank you.